Hello there. In this video, we will be talking about essential mineral elements. So comes a question, what are these essential mineral elements? Right. So essential mineral element is basically are a group of those elements which are required by the plants for growth and development. Right. The mineral elements which are utilized by the plants for growth and development, and in absence of these essential mineral elements, the plant, it cannot complete the life cycle, right? It cannot complete its life cycle. Then such a element is referred to as mineral element of essential type. Okay, so these elements would become essential elements, and the example of such elements include elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Then you have phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, iron. Then there are borons. Just a minute, yeah, B. Then you have these things which are called as manganese, then copper, then zinc, and molybdenum and chlorine. So in total, you could have as many as 16 elements which are considered to be essential for plants. Right. Similarly, there is also another group of elements which is referred to as non-essential, non-essential elements. Now these are a group of elements which are found inside the plant. Right. These are a group of elements which are found inside the plant, but actually their function is not very well understood. Right. We don't see these minerals or these elements getting utilized in the component of the plant, but they are present there. And since it is not readily utilized, we refer to them as the non-essential part. And example of the same includes elements like sodium. You have the silicon, then the aluminium, then selenium, then strontium, and then vanadium. Right. So we can categorize these mineral elements into two groups: the essential ones and the non-essential ones. The essentials one would be directly involved in the growth and development, whereas the non-essential elements would only be present there. So there were these guys by the name of Arnon and Stout. Right. There were these guys by the name of Arnon and Stout who proposed the criteria of essentiality. Right. These guys proposed criteria for essentiality. Right. What are the different phenomena using which I can group an element as essential or a non-essential element? So they have proposed 4 such events. First, these elements must be absolutely necessary for growth and development. Right, they must be necessary for the normal growth and development of the plant, normal growth and development of plant. Right, they must be readily utilized and can influence the growth as well as the development of the plant. And in the absence, if these elements are not provided, we'll find that the growth and the development of the plant would be affected. Right. So this is one of the point using which we can group an element, we can classify an element as essential or non-essential. Similarly, these elements that I'm talking about, their requirement must be very specific. Right. Requirement must be specific. That means if I'm talking about say for example iron, that is Fe. So Fe should not get replaced by some other element like magnesium and its function would carry on. Right. I must provide this Fe only, and it should be such that it becomes irreplaceable. We cannot replace these elements. Right. So requirement must be specific, that is not replaceable. Right. Then we have the third criteria. Third criteria is it should be directly involved in metabolism. Right. It should be directly involved in metabolism. It should not be such that it remains there but is not utilized by the plant. Right. So the essential elements, if we are talking about, it must be directly involved in metabolism. Alright. So you can actually find that this carbon, the hydrogen along with the oxygen and nitrogen are utilized in synthesis of various biomolecules in the plants as well as in the animals, right? But here we'll be restricting ourselves to the plants only. I've got the carbohydrates, I've got these proteins, then there are these fats and the lipids along with the nucleic acids. All of these are utilizing these carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen along with some other elements too. So they are getting involved in metabolism and forming the absolutely necessary biomolecules. Out of all the elements that are known to us, in the periodic table we've got like as many as 120 elements, and in fact more than that nowadays. So you'd actually realize that out of these many elements, only 20 elements are considered to be essential, right? Only 20 elements are considered to be essential. All right. So what we can actually do right now is we can divide these essential elements into two groups, right? We can divide these elements into two groups so that we can have a better understanding of this, right? So what I'll do is I'll group this essential elements into two part. Just a minute, yeah. So there goes this essential elements. So I would group them into two parts, and this would be divided on the basis of first the quality. Okay, I mean in fact quantity. All right. So I have divided this essential element on the basis of quantity. Then I would divide them on the basis of the function they perform. Okay. So an essential element could be divided on the basis of two criteria. First is the function they serve, and second the amount of quantity or the quantity with which or in which they are utilized by the plant. If I'm talking about the quantity, I can group these essential elements into two categories. First is macronutrient. Just give me a minute. First is macronutrient, and the second category would be micronutrient. Now, as the name suggests, micro means something that would be required in a small amount, and macro means something that would be required in greater amount, right? So now these are a group of minerals or the elements which are required in large quantity, right? Large quantity. We would be comparing these two, right? We'll be comparing this macronutrient and the micronutrient, and then we would be performing our academical part, right? So there is the large quantity is required in macronutrient. Micronutrient would require a smaller quantity, or I can say lesser quantity, right? Smaller quantity, lesser quantity. The quantity, when I say large quantity, I'm talking that I'm saying that it is required in quantity greater than 10 millimole per kilogram. All right. Whereas the micronutrients would be required in less than 10 millimole per kilogram. Right. So we got an understanding on the basis of the quantity. I could have a macronutrient, I could have a micronutrient. Now, the macronutrients are usually involved in synthesis of organic molecules, right? They are involved in synthesis of organic molecules. Along with that, they also are responsible for development of osmotic pressure, right? They are also responsible for development of osmotic potential, yeah, osmotic difference, osmotic pressure. I'll write potential in fact. All right. Now this, on the other hand, the micronutrients, they are mostly involved in functioning of the enzymes, right? We'll have the enzymes, and these enzymes would lead a lot of cofactors and the coenzymes for their better functioning. So these micronutrients would be responsible for functioning of the enzymes. Along with this, I would also find that they could serve as the cofactors, right? They could serve as the cofactors. Many a times they would be serving as the metal activator for the enzyme. Cofactors or metal activators. All right. So there we go with the micronutrients. Some of the example of this could be taken as, since we are talking about the substances which are required for synthesis of organic molecules, I could have examples of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Then I can also take phosphorus, I can take potassium, then sulfur and calcium, along with some part of magnesium and iron. Here on the micronutrient side, I could have elements like copper, I could have elements like molybdenum, then I could take into consideration the zinc, the boron, along with some amount of chlorine, then nickel and manganese too. Alright. Now, if we are talking about the macronutrient, I can see of all these elements, I'll be majorly talking and be concerned about this carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. These three elements are mainly absorbed by carbon dioxide along with water. Now we do appreciate the fact that both of this carbon dioxide and water are utilized for the purpose of a process called as something. I do not know what that process is. If you can help me out by writing this answer on the comment box, in fact, right? Can you help me out with this? What reaction is this? What process is this? Can you help me out? Right? I would really appreciate if you can come up with the answers in the comment box. Right? Now, these macronutrients can further be classified into two groups. Right? It could be further classified into two groups. Something called as the primary nutrient and something referred to as the secondary nutrient. So there goes your primary nutrient and here you have your secondary nutrients. Now the example of primary nutrients are NPK. Examples of primary nutrients are NPK, whereas the example for secondary nutrients could be calcium, magnesium and sulfur. Right. So this was the classification of essential elements on the basis of quantity. Right. It was macro and micro. Now let us try to get an understanding of these essential nutrients by means of the functions they perform. Right. So I could have categorized these elements into four categories on the basis of function. First group would be for the essential element as component of biomolecules. Right. They form the components of biomolecules. Now, as seen earlier, we have these carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, which come together and give rise to the biomolecules like carbohydrates, lipids, and all these things. So we have examples of the element by the name of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. We could also take a moment to appreciate this, that the essential element can also be forming a part of component of energy molecule. They can also behave as a component of energy related molecule, right? They could be part of an energy related molecule. Now, what are these energy related molecules? We are very well familiar with this thing called as ATP, right? We are well familiar with this ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So here you got this phosphate, right? So phosphorus in case of ATP. All right. Similarly, if you are talking about this thing, the place where the process of photosynthesis takes place, right? The leaf appears to be green in color. The green color of the leaf is owing to the presence of a certain type of pigment, and that pigment, dear students and friends of mine, is referred to as magnesium. Am I right? No. This pigment which makes this leaf appear green is chlorophyll, and it has in its structure this element called as chlorophyll. Right. So that was the second category on the basis of function. The third category would include the elements which could activate or inhibit enzymes, right? So I can write inhibitors and activators of enzyme. activators of enzyme. Right. Now we do know that this is an enzyme, man. This is an enzyme. Right. We know that the enzymes are associated with the reactions, and they could act on the reaction and increase the rate of reaction significantly. Right. Some of the example of these inhibitors or activators could be magnesium. In fact, magnesium acts on the on the enzyme called as Rubisco. Now I would really appreciate a moment and thank this Rubisco for being the most abundant enzyme on earth. This happens to be the most abundant enzyme on earth. In the successive classes, we would also figure out the functioning of Rubisco, and we would also try to understand the process in which this Rubisco would be participating. Right. Then there is something called as pepcase. Many of you would be aware of this pepcase. Both of them are related. This Rubisco acts on the acts in the C3 plant, whereas the pepcase would act on the C4 plants. All right. The fourth category would be the fourth category would be excuse me. Fourth category would be maintenance of osmotic pressure. All right. The fourth category would be maintenance of osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure. Now this osmotic pressure, when I'm talking about, I must thank this element called as potassium. Potassium, that is K, for helping my cell out to maintain its osmotic pressure. Without this osmotic pressure, we would realize that our cells could burst or they could shrink. Right, so this potassium is really somebody to be thanked about for that, and this potassium also helps in maintaining the osmotic pressure so that opening and closing of stomata could be regulated. Right, we do know the fact that the stomatas are the tiny pores on the surface of the leaf, both on the dorsal and the ventral side. These are the kidney shaped structures which are responsible for carrying the exchange of gases and water in the plant. These cells that are drawn here are referred to as the guard cell. The movement of water in and out of the cell regulates the opening and the closing of the stomata. Right. So there we go. We had a brief discussion on essential elements and their grouping on the basis of quantity and the function they play. Right. Then we also had an understanding of the criteria for essentiality, and we took into discussion the fact that there are these elements called as essential and the non-essential elements. So from here on, we'll be continuing with the major role of the nutrient, and all that thing would be discussed in the next class. I hope you would have understood the video, and it would be really very helpful if you could like and share and also subscribe. Right. So see you in the next video. Till then, take a very good care of yourself and stay happy, stay blessed. Thank you.